Selling a little or a lot? Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. From the launch your own online shop stage to the first real-life store stage, all the way to the did we just hit 1 million orders stage? Shopify's there to help you grow. Shopify helps you turn browsers into buyers with the internet's best converting checkout. 36% better on average compared to the other leading commerce platforms. Because businesses that grow with Shopify. Get a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/promo. Shopify.com/promo.
Hello and welcome to The Price of Music, the show that looks at the money behind the music industry with me, Steve Lamack, and Music Ally's Head of Insight, Stuart Dredge. Another interview for you in this episode, this time with Kelly Wood, who is National Organiser for Live Theatre and Music Writers at the Musicians Union. But previously, having studied music through school and university, was in a band for several years as well before joining the MU. So he's well placed to talk about the issues facing musicians at the moment, not least attempting to play music for a living. Kelly, hello.
Hello.
And thank you very much for talking to us. I think it is probably worth explaining just briefly at the outset what the Musicians Union actually is and what its function has become.
Okay. Quite simply, we're the trade union for musicians. So obviously musicians are quite a varied bunch and they work in all over the industry, really. So we try to represent all musicians in all places. And we do that on a direct basis, working with individual musicians. We do it collectively, and we do it with a lot of work behind the scenes within the industry to try and make sure that it's a healthy industry to work in.
And has the role and the makeup of the membership, has it changed a lot over the years from where it started to where you are now?
Yeah, I guess it has, because music itself has changed quite a lot, hasn't it? And I think, we all have to respond to the times and the way that music is consumed and the way that audiences and consumers use music, and musicians themselves as well. I guess a lot of them now have more diverse and varied careers. It used to be the case that people could more, focus on one particular element or, a very defined career. And I think there's more portfolio style musicians now, people doing lots of bits and pieces just to pay the bills and see which one works the best, and they sort of have to focus their career according to where the money comes from, I think.
Very much. And do you know how many members you have at the moment?
Yeah, we do. We've just gone over 35,000. So for many years we were around the 30,000 mark. But I think, the last few years, particularly after lockdown and people essentially feeling like their careers were falling apart overnight, we've put a lot of new members on. And also I think it's the work that we do is very relevant, and we try to make sure that we're improving in terms of the diversity of our membership. And that seems to be working. So it's going up every day.
What are the big issues that you're campaigning about at the moment? Because I feel like we hear regularly what kind of campaigns you're running and what issues and news. What are the key things at the moment?
I think it's probably a lot of the things that you see, across the industry that a lot of people are working on, like, streaming, AI, arts funding. There's not enough funding. So we see the impact of that on orchestras, on venues, on music education. There's individual campaigns that we run attached to, specific workplaces. You might be aware of Welsh National Opera at the minute, where we're trying to prevent that becoming, a kind of part-time company and people receiving 15% pay cuts. So there's some very specific organised work going on, but then there's the bigger, wider stuff. And we've got a campaign called Fair Score that's for media composers, because there's a lot of royalty buyouts in that sector. So we do a lot of education kind of work with members as part of that, but then also negotiating and lobbying within the industry and politically.
Mm-hmm. That education point is a very good one to make, isn't it? Because I imagine you probably have a lot of people come to you who don't really understand the industry as well as one might, and probably need direction and also need to know what their rights are, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's it. Musicians learn from their mistakes a lot of the time, don't they? They take a bad bit of work where there's no fee or a low fee, or they've lost their rights, and they come to us afterwards and they've kind of realised what they've done, but they're trying to reverse it, I suppose. But we saw a lot of this during lockdown, where obviously live performers just lost all their work literally overnight. And so very quickly had to turn their hand to other bits of work, trying to stay in the industry. And so we'd get people who were, predominantly giggers saying, oh, I'm doing some music for the podcast and audiobook. I haven't got a clue what I should be asking for, the fee, the royalties. So it's having to learn new areas of work and the contracts that go with that, really. So I think they do have to be quite adaptable, don't they, musicians? But we have to try and help them to learn the areas so they don't end up in bad contracts.
So you're almost a surrogate manager in some cases, explaining how the industry works, and if you're not directly looking after their affairs, you are at least helping them to do it for themselves.
Yeah, very much so. And I think a lot of musicians join us and then I guess we're a safety net, or they join us because they like being in a union, they want their public liability insurance. And we have other members who come to us really regularly. And you can tell when they're having an admin day, a big back and forth of emails about all kinds of things. So, yeah, we do. We very much fill that role of, support and all the things they need us to be. But I think it's fair to say that all our members use us very differently. Some are very proactive and they'll come to us saying, what do you think about this contract, this gig fee? Should I do this? And others, it's more, okay, you're there when I need you. And that works for them.
Tell us about, you were talking about some of the campaigns. There was the Fair Play campaign as well, which was about being properly paid by venues and trying to build up a network of venues who don't indulge in the old the old trick of asking artists to pay to actually go on a stage.
Yeah, that's right. So we published our Fair Play Guide back in, I think it's 2012. We did a panel do you remember, in the City in Manchester, all those years ago? We did a panel in 2010, I think it was, with it had like Guy Garvey on it. And we just said, right, let's talk about pay to play. It's happening. And I think what we discovered from that, we had a lot of people input to that debate. And I think we realised that it wasn't necessarily all venues. There was a few external promoters who were doing bad stuff in otherwise good venues. And so they were relying on the musicians to do all the promotion, but they weren't really cutting them into the profit. So the musicians were sharing the risk, but not sharing the profits, which we didn't think was fair. So we thought, well, do you know what? It is okay for musicians to be expected to do some promotion these days. That's what socials are for, and musicians are pretty good at it. So we thought, as long as the arrangement is fair on both sides, we can run with this. We just need to help musicians understand what's fair, and also venues, because some of the deals we were seeing, I don't think venues or promoters were trying to be exploitative. They just hadn't quite got it right. So we set up this guide, kind of framework, and then we opened it up as a database and said to venues, if you're prepared to commit to this, then we'll put you on our published database of venues. And we know that musicians use that when they're looking for gigs, particularly when they're trying to break out of the area they live in and go a bit further afield, knowing that a venue has kind of got a stamp of approval from us and they're not going to be treated badly. It means artists have the confidence to go to those venues. So it's a two-way street. We want to help the venues if they are fair to our members. But it's working really well, and we're sort of trying to keep that database relevant, I suppose. So we're sort of looking at what we can add to it in terms of things like access information and green clauses. But we're always looking for venues to sign up so we can keep it as thorough as possible.
Yeah, it's just, I thought pay to play had sort of died out in the 80s, and I wasn't really aware how it had continued, just sometimes in a slightly different form. But I remember when I was living in Harlow, and there was it was a great little music scene, but trying to break into London at that point, there were so many venues at the time who were basically saying, of course, yeah, we'll give you a gig. There was one very famous one in Covent Garden, which I shan't name, but the only way you could get on that stage was by paying the money to do it. But obviously at that point it was, if you want to be seen by a record company, or if that seems so old fashioned. So I thought that must have gone away, but no, be careful out there. There are still people who might try and take you for a ride.
Yeah, I think, and I don't think it's like, the venues that we talk about so much these days and that, MVT represent and, really look after. I don't think these are bad places.
No.
I think it's just you get the odd one that might be someone who's not very experienced, or it might be an external promoter. And it's not always with bad intentions. It's just people get things wrong. And we just don't want our members getting caught up in that because they can't afford to. There's so little money at that level, isn't there, as you know, that we just need to say, if you are going to be working within the grassroots, here's how to do it. And,
Yeah.
Feel free to negotiate. That's the other thing. I think musicians don't always feel empowered or confident to push back on things. They feel that it's accept it or go away. And we try and educate them to say, do you know what, this is how you do it. This is what you need to say. This is what you want to get out of it. And just have a conversation, because most people are happy to negotiate if you try.
Talking about pay, just pay in general, because this is something which we get asked about at times. When you see the phrase MU rates, what is the MU rate, and how do you set it? If you see what I mean, who decides what it should be?
Yeah, that's interesting, because we have rates that are negotiated with employees in the industry, and so they have a lot of clout. Right, they've been negotiated by both sides, and they're set, and they're a minimum. They're only a minimum, so people are free to negotiate higher. For our live rates, I think you're referring to, they're what we refer to as promulgated. So we set them. So we work with our members. We have a live committee. We set those rates and we increase them, year on year usually. But we can't really enforce them in many situations. So unless they're actually referred to in other contracts and agreements, it's really we're sort of reliant on people understanding that that's what is required for a musician to turn up and work and not be out of pocket and not be treated unfairly. So they do have some clout. I mean, they're used in, funding applications. So the main funders would expect union rates to be used. And we do know there's a lot of engagers and employers out there who do use them because they understand that that's a fair rate. But it can be a hard sell for people. And because we can't really enforce them, all we can say is, we would encourage people to use them as a minimum. And we encourage our members to as well. I think they serve really useful outside of the music industry. So if someone's asked you to play at their wedding or their birthday party, these kind of people aren't experienced in engaging musicians. So if you're able to say, well, these are the union rates, these travel expenses I need, I think that's really useful there. Otherwise, you're just, the other people think you're just making numbers up. So having something we can signpost and saying union rates, I mean, it's quite hard to push back on that, isn't it?
Yeah, very much. And I guess it also helps in when you're dealing with other branches of the media as well, where music interacts with the media. So I guess, the MU rate will stand as, the level of payment for places like the BBC. And does it work in TV and film as well?
I think we have a lot of negotiated rates. So we do individual negotiations with, the different broadcasters and other people who employ within the music industry. So there are loads and loads of rates. It's like quite often when members come in and they're not aware of these things and they think that they have to go and set their own rates. But actually, if you look at all the different areas of work, we do negotiate quite closely. And it's not always easy, because sometimes obviously people don't want, they say they can't afford pay rises, but it's better that we handle those than individual musicians doing it all over the place. At least we can kind of, we can go in there and we can be a bit tougher than individual musicians who are worried about losing work. So it's kind of easier if we take care of it and then leave it as a minimum for people to negotiate up from.
I mean, in terms of your members, and like you were saying, you obviously have a lot of interaction with them and you're hearing from them. What are you hearing? Like, what are they saying? Are they struggling with the cost of living squeeze? Are there less opportunities? Are their fees being driven down? What are the big things you're hearing from the membership about what's affecting their ability to earn a living at the moment?
I think definitely struggling with the level of fees and finding opportunities. I think it's so competitive, isn't it, as an industry? And I think those two things together, like the fees that you're offered and knowing how competitive it is, there's someone that will come along and do a badly paid bit of work if you turn it down. So I think it puts a lot of pressure on musicians, and they feel it can be a very coercive place as well. I think the music industry, we do see people bring to us exchanges they've had with employers and engagers where it has been quite heavy, and it's literally like, take it or, I'll find someone else, because there is always someone else. That's the problem. But you have to kind of remind members that they've got to sort of stand their ground, because that helps the industry. If everyone's prepared to do something for less money, there won't be careers for artists. So I think there's people are really struggling with the amount of work, the way that it's paid. And I think the cost of living crisis has like a really wider impact, doesn't it? Because some people's careers are more paid for by fans and audiences than by, engagers and employers. So if you're reliant on other people to come to your gigs and to buy your products and your releases, knowing that everyone's really skint, I think that's really tough. But hopefully things will start to feel a bit better these days. But I think that's been a real concern, is people just feel that their audiences are struggling. So they've been sort of wanting to keep ticket prices down, not charge too much for their merch. And it just really squeezes things. So it's really tough out there. But I think musicians are quite tough and resilient themselves. You have to be, don't you? You have to adapt. So I think a lot of our members they're trying to navigate it. And I think we hear a lot from members who don't want to take work outside of the industry. They'd rather do anything within the industry than take work outside of it. So it's just they ask for us where they can find other work opportunities, and so a lot of our advice is kind of careers advice. Yeah.
God, crikey, because I'm just adding up how many different facets of the musicians' union there are. Management, you're a job centre. Just how many services you offer. It's incredible. How much of, because you were in a band for some time as well, how much, I don't know, were you a good negotiator, and did you manage to turn down work when you thought, actually, we shouldn't take this, should we, everybody, because that's a terrible fee they're offering? It's a lot of this that you're sort of passing on to people from your own personal experience.
To a degree. I mean, I didn't do the booking when I was in the band. Did you know what, though, as well? I'm a terrible negotiator. Like, I love doing it for other people. But if it came to myself, I'd be rubbish. And I think that's why I really like to take time in the way that we educate our members around negotiation and empowering them to do it themselves, because I appreciate how hard it is doing it yourself. And you get some really interesting wins. I spoke to a composer recently who was doing some media work, and she just felt a bit out of her depth with the negotiations. So clearly a great composer. They wanted her to do it, but they'd offered her a fee and some terms, and she just didn't understand it. And so we had like literally a half-hour chat, and then she emailed me the next day saying she'd got an extra $9,000 on her fee.
Wow.
And so sometimes that's all it takes, is just to make people feel confident and to just say to them, look, that's how this broadcaster tends to work, and these things in your contract, they're probably not going to negotiate on, so focus on these things and focus on your fee. And I think people just need to know that it's okay to do what they want to do, and they want us to say, you're absolutely right to go back and ask for X, Y, and Z. Feel free to say that you've spoken to your union if you think it will help. So it's just, I have a lot of sympathy with musicians, because they're expected to be a lot of things, aren't they, to manage their careers. And I think it's really hard. So we don't take for granted that people can just go away and act on the advice that we give them. We try to make sure that we give them in a way where they actually can go away and do that.
And can you also, you mentioned people coming to you when something's possibly gone wrong. Do you help with the grievance process as well? Do you get a lot of people coming to you and saying, I can't represent myself, but this has happened to me?
Yeah, we get a lot of that. And as we're a trade union, we can accompany people, in formal employment meetings and disciplinaries and things. So we do a lot of that behind the scenes. And it's really hard work. It's really tough, that kind of stuff, because you see people sometimes losing their jobs or in redundancy situations. And that's where I think people would be really stuck without us as well, because it's an awful process to go through. And even sort of less formally, we get people who are in really awful positions with people they've worked with, and there's disputes, whether it's a band dispute or whether it's between, a commissioner and a composer or something. So we do get asked to intervene quite a lot and to accompany people. And I think, that's that's basic union stuff, isn't it, really?
Mm-hmm. I'd love the bassist of a band if they were all members of the MU to go on strike, and then the rest of the you having to sort it out in the middle. That'd be good.
Yeah, there's
Problem,
plenty of
Stuart.
fan disputes.
Yeah. Problem, Stuart. We were talking about problems, weren't we?
We were, and I think you mentioned streaming actually at the start. I know the MU's been very active in talking about how streaming should evolve to be fairer to musicians. Is that one of the big challenges for musicians now? Is the musicians who earn their money from streaming and from putting music out, that's not quite working for a lot of them? But what's your kind of view of that whole situation?
Yeah, that's right. It's the unfair levels of revenue. So it's still an active campaign, and obviously it had the political inquiry, which helped. I think what we try to do usually is to fix things without needing to take it into the political arena. Because once you do that, in some ways it's out of your hands a bit, isn't it, in terms of how it goes forward. And I know, Steve, we've talked about this with Live, haven't we, and the levy. You try and fix things internally, but if it's not working, then that's when you need to take it somewhere else. And I think, streaming is a really important one. And it's just interesting because musicians need all parts to work, don't they? And they need to be fairly paid from them all. And streaming clearly isn't working. And I think what's really interesting as well is that fans, they don't feel it's fair either. I think when you can take fans with you and you can talk to them about it, and that's why it's been great that it's so public, is because you can get that extra level of support so that when you do need to take it, to a political level, you can take, big petitions and things in with you to say, look, it's not just the musicians complaining. No one thinks this is fair. So yeah, that's been a big one. And I think when I talked earlier about us sort of being quite adaptable, and, that's one thing that has changed a lot, hasn't it? It used to be that people sold, records in more physical formats, and that still does happen. But, people are consuming music differently now, and we need the industry to operate in a way that's fair so that the creators don't lose out.
I don't want to stray you into too many political waters here, because I know that can be sensitive. But when we've had an election, we've got a new government, as the MU, is that a moment for you to kind of go, right, we've got a new government, we can go and tell them the stuff we were telling the last government? To which my perspective was nothing much happened after that streaming inquiry in terms of governmental stuff, did it? But are you feeling now that there may be a new push for whatever the government can do to fix this, to do it? Or do you think it's more about kind of dealing with the industry, I guess, and figuring it out internally?
Well, we're affiliated to the Labour Party, so we have good access now. So this is really good news for us going forward, that we can get in there and have those conversations, in a way that we couldn't. So I think we do feel really positive about it. Obviously, I don't think we're expecting to see changes everywhere overnight, but I think there will be changes, and it's really great that we have the access that we haven't previously had. So that's something that we can really use, and we will be using. I know that our General Secretary's, I think she's already met with Keir Starmer, so it will be really useful for us.
Oh, in a way, on the streaming inquiry, it felt like the big report came out, and it almost sparked so much conversation. And I feel like there's changes happening in the industry too. Like there is, like you said, there's been an awareness of what the issues are. So even when bills didn't happen, do you feel like there's actually positive change happening because of the campaigns you ran, because of the campaigns people like Tom Gray ran? Like all that effort wasn't just about, can we get a new law made? It was about change happening in all different kinds of ways, I guess.
Yeah, and I think, again, it's like that education for artists, and actually fans as well, isn't it? So artists know what they're getting into when they choose where they upload their music, and understanding what they're likely to see further down the road from it. I think there's not always great transparency around remuneration in the music industry. So it's hard for someone to know what they're going to get back from stuff, and we've done a lot of work, for instance, with Live, with the, we've tried to educate our members when they do gigs, how much they will get from that. You can work out, what the tariff is, how to work that out from box office. But I don't think it's always been so easy for people with streaming. And I think that's why when we did the campaign and worked with the Ivors Academy and Tom Gray, it just really helped people to understand that it's a problem. and also to actually look at what it meant for them as artists. So I think I think people need to like take a lot of care around their career, don't they? Understand all the different levels of remuneration. And I think one of the things that was really interesting during lockdown is when I spoke to some composers and songwriters, and quite a few of them said, you know what, I'm so glad that I've done some good deals in the past, because if I wasn't getting royalties through lockdown, I don't know what I'd do. And so it shows that when you're able to make good informed choices around what you do with your music, that it will pay off further down the line.
The other thing that's been really interesting is having that knowledge about how musicians are living in current business. I know you did the musicians census last year, and that was the first one, I believe. And that feels, I think I've seen, there's been 2 or 3 or 4 reports since, kind of picking out different data points from that. Has that been important? And was there anything that kind of surprised you in the information that came out, the findings of how musicians are working and living?
I don't think it was surprising to us. I think we kind of had an idea of what it might look like. But what it's really good for is giving us sort of evidence-based information for the work that we do, so that whether you're talking to MPs or you're talking to other parts of the industry, you've actually got really hard data. And it's given us a really good insight to, it helps inform our ED&I work, which is really important. And so it's kind of helping us to represent musicians who might not even be our members yet, but just to look at who's out there, how they're struggling. Unfortunately, it wasn't surprising, but, it has been really useful to us. And I think as well, it's, a lot of people have found it. Oh yeah, I think some people were surprised, weren't they, with like the average earnings being like £20,000 of a musician. Some people just couldn't believe that and found it really shocking. And, knowing musicians who work really, really hard and then understanding that they're not really paid proportionately. So I think it's been really useful for a wider awareness as well.
For people who maybe haven't seen it, the census, the musician census, what sort of questions were you asking? What other, as you say, data, what other information and hard facts came out of it that's useful going forward?
I think the main one was around, the average earnings, really, because I think as well as it being like the average being something like 20,000, I think there was an awful lot earning less than £14,000 a year. But it certainly, like I say, it's really informed our ED&I work, because the industry isn't as diverse and representative as it should be. And we're doing a lot of work to make it better, and also to make it, to make workplaces inclusive, so that as diversity goes up, people are actually going into workplaces that are going to be okay for them, because for a long time, workplaces haven't been as inclusive as they should. So I think we've, over the last couple of years, and since we did the census, we've seen underrepresented groups within our membership rise pretty well. So it's helping our own targets as well in terms of our ED&I plans.
We were following the misogyny in music inquiry last year. One of the things that came out of that seemed was one, that there's a lot of misogyny in the music industry, which probably counts under those not surprising findings. But also that because a lot of people are freelancers, they didn't really have protection, didn't feel like they could do things when bad things happen to them. And that felt like something as a union where the work you're doing is really important, because people are freelancers. Like you said, they might feel like they have to take a job because their earnings are low. And that can sometimes create those situations, kind of, where there can be exploitation and not so good things happening.
Yeah, I think that, we've always argued for stronger protections for freelancers. And I think something that we're seeing a lot of at the minute is, the fear culture within the industry. We get so many problems brought to us where members don't want us to actually escalate or do anything. So they'll tell us about a really unfair or awful situation. And when we say, okay, you're all right if we approach whoever to deal with this, and they say, no, I don't want you to rock the boat. So they want us to know about it, but they don't feel they're in a position to let us fix it. So I think we witness a lot of the issues with being freelance, and it's really hard because we don't always want to walk away from those situations not having done something. And sometimes people report things that are affecting more musicians than just the person that's brought it to us. So we don't feel we can turn a blind eye to it, because we say, well, we know there's other people being affected here. So we have to have quite a lot of delicate conversations around that. But I do think the fear culture is particularly bad at the minute. And I think that's why, when we were talking earlier about opportunities and levels of pay and stuff, people are just really scared. So they don't always feel that they can make the best choices.
So, in a way, as we start looking ahead to the future and how your work might evolve, one of the things that's coming across is that part of the MU's role is just to constantly remind people of the value of music and the value of musicians, and it should have a true value. And that's what essentially that's what you're standing on a chair shouting about: value the music.
Absolutely. And I think that's what starts with the members, really, helping them value their music, whether that's the time involved, whether that's the actual music that they're, assigning or licensing to someone, whether it's a gig. It's just helping people understand what something is worth, which is really hard on a blanket basis. But it's the kind of nuts and bolts work that we do, I suppose. It's the bread and butter of what we do, just saying to people, this is how you can price your work, and make sure you do. And, if you want to accept something that we don't think is ideal, then do it in the knowledge of why we don't think it's ideal. So if you still want to go ahead and do it, then at least understand that this means that, you're not going to get royalties in the future when we feel you should. So it's that real education to the musicians themselves, and also across the industry. 'Cause, like we said earlier, I don't think everyone's out to exploit musicians. Sometimes
No.
we see, like low budget filmmakers who are commissioning composers, and they just don't know what a commissioning contract should look like. So it's not that they're trying to get one over them. So we have to educate both parties, essentially.
Do you get cross though sometimes when you see some of the offers that are being made, possibly by people who do have the money and are rather undervaluing or underselling, the work of the artist?
Yeah, totally. But you have to kind of channel that, don't you? So that negotiations don't just become like two people locking horns and, fighting. I think what we try and do is just help people set out, what they're worth. And, people, like saying, people can be really shy about it. So sometimes you just have to help them phrase it in a way where they feel like, oh, okay, that's totally fine to ask for that. And we know we've got members who invent managers that they don't have, just so they can sign off emails from someone else, because they just feel embarrassed asking for more money.
Do you know what? That I have come across that in the past, and particularly, there was an all-female band who I knew, I thought who were very good at the end of the 80s, start of the 90s, and they invented a male manager, and all of a sudden the venues that they were approaching were getting back in touch with them. But then obviously they had to then go and find a guy to phone these places up. So that, but I mean, it was that bad, So on both levels, they needed authority, but then it turned out in their case the authority had to be male, which it was tragic, terrible. But yes, the inventing of a manager, I've come across that. Yeah.
It works as well, because it just makes people feel more confident, and suddenly they're okay to ask for, an extra £100 on their fee. But if they were in a room having that conversation, they just wouldn't feel able to. So it's a really hard thing to overcome. And I think where you see musicians who do really well from the start, it's quite often because they've got, that confidence, and they just feel totally okay having conversations about money.
Yeah. I suppose, that's an interesting point, isn't it? When you're an artist and you think about your art, you're not necessarily the best person to judge or even to communicate how much you think your art is worth.
I think as well, like, people make you feel like, your music's special and you do it because you love it. So they actually make artists feel quite apologetic about asking for money. And so I think you have to just totally park that and just say, well, if I'm going to keep doing music, I need to make a career out of it, in which case I need to be paid. So you have to be quite hardline about it, I think. But it's not for everyone. And that's why some people very quickly want agents and managers and other people to represent them.
Yeah.
It does feel really important at the moment to have that idea of just giving musicians confidence. I was talking to someone the other day who's a musician, and they were saying, all the problems we've talked about, challenges, and then they were like, and then AI is coming to eat my lunch. And they were really, and we talk about AI a lot on this show, as everyone does in the industry. And I feel like one of the things that's going to be really important, besides protection for musicians, is confidence of musicians in their value of their work. Like, even though AI can do X, Y, and Z, the value of a human making music is brilliant. And it feels like they need that confidence shot to prepare for that discussion, perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it just feels like there's been so many threats, with lockdown, with Brexit. There's been so many things that have just really rocked people's careers. That this feels like the next big one. I mean, it's already here, isn't it? It's already impacting. But I think it's just, you have to roll with a lot of punches, don't you? And I think that's where we come in, is because individuals can't really fight back on this, can they? They can't. We've already seen clauses creeping into contracts with things like music libraries, with some of the less fair, shall we say, production music companies trying to introduce clauses to their terms that say that they can use your music for generative purposes. And so if you're someone who currently earns really well through that library and they want to introduce this clause, what do? Do you walk away and then you take your music away and your future royalties away? But if you stay with it, it's like turkeys voting for Christmas, isn't it?
I was seeing there was a thing last year, wasn't it? The Council of Music Makers, which I think EMU is part of, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
And that letter saying if a label wants to license their catalogue to an AI company, they should go back to the artists and songwriters and say, do you give permission? Like, those things are going to be quite a big part of the next year or so's debate, I think. It's not just about should AI companies get permission. It'll be about should labels get permission from the musicians. And that seems to be a debate that's still only just starting, I guess.
Yeah, everyone's having to respond quite quickly, aren't they, to this? I mean, it's hard when things are already happening because you feel a bit on the back foot. But I think there is a really, like you say, through the CMM, there is quite a tough line from our side on this. It needs addressing. We can't leave it to artists. It needs the industry to respond really firmly on it, because otherwise it's not just copyright infringement. It's also like job displacement, isn't it? Where there will be fewer roles. So it needs a very tough response. And I think, we've got the industry it's really well organised, isn't it? If you look at all the different, like the CMM, and you look at the work we're doing with the live board, things are quite organised, I think, at the minute. And there's quite a lot of, there's a lot of commonality across our work. So I think we're all in quite a good place on these issues to fight them.
I mean, that's one. I suppose that's one thing that is coming over the horizon, if it's not already here. The question of AI. Looking forward, what are your own hopes for the future? What do you think some of the hurdles will be, and what do you think? What would help your members in the future? Are there certain things that you think, if this happens, this will be a breakthrough? What are we looking at in the next 5 years?
I think the work that we're doing with live, and hopefully, if we can, if the levy is implemented and we get some money going back to grassroots and venues, I think that will be really helpful. We've, out of our 35,000 members, around half of those do some kind of live work. So it would be varied across, venues and probably busking and all kinds of things. But I think we've got so many musicians in that space, and it's really tough, and it's been tough for years. And so that really, really needs some help quite urgently. So I'm hopeful that's coming. I think as well, if like we're talking about audiences, if people feel a bit better going forward, if the political change, is as good as we hope it is, then people are going to start to feel that they can, spend more money on music, and, go to more shows, buy more music. I think that all feeds into it because there is so many artists' careers do need audiences to spend money. So I think that will have a really big impact. I think as well with music education, I think we're doing a lot of campaigning around that. There's been a government inquiry recently, and we need to see more music in schools so that all people can access it, so that people can play instruments without having to pay for private lessons. I know there's been quite a big reduction in the amount of schools offering music GCSE, which is it's really sad. It's tragic because a lot of people that's their sort of start, isn't it, into the industry. So hopefully we'll see more music in schools, so that everyone can access it. It shouldn't be something that you have to pay for to learn an instrument, I don't think.
For more details, the MU website is very comprehensive. It's got all the stuff that you need. Have a look at that. We wish you all the best. Thank you very much for talking to us, Kelly. We wish you all the best going forward. Keep in touch. If anything comes up that you think we might be interested in, do get in touch and we'll pass it on to our listeners.
Thank you.
Kelly Wood from the MU giving us an insight into the lives of hopefully or aspiring professional musicians. I don't know, what did you learn from that, Stuart? I thought it was really interesting, and the idea that the MU. I mean, it's more than a safety net. I know Kelly said it's a safety net, but it is a safety net. But it turns out it's so much more than that.
I think so, yeah. I think that talking about the research they're doing and the hard data and how they're going in now to politicians saying, look, this is how much musicians earn, here are the problems they face. That feels really valuable, having that kind of information. But I think in a way, and that research is showing there's some real challenges, and it could be quite doom and gloom. But I kind of always came away also happy, feeling like there's someone out there who's fighting that fight for musicians. And she was saying from individual cases where someone's been stiffed by a promoter and they'll get involved help, to that campaigning work. I think I come out of it feeling positive that there are loads of challenges, but the MU is doing all these things to kind of try and help musicians stand up for their rights and feel confident. So yeah, positive overall.
Yeah, thanks again to Kelly. And thanks to you for listening. If you have enjoyed the show, help us out by subscribing to the programme in your podcast app. And if you have a moment, by giving us a short review and rating, we would be more than appreciative if you could. Also, if you have a question which you'd like answered on the show, one of those how does this work style questions which might have been bothering you, email us at thepriceofmusicpodcast@gmail.com. And finally, if you'd like to support the show, we now have a Patreon page. You can find us at patreon.com/thepriceofmusic. That's it for this time. We'll be back next week. Look after yourselves. Cheerio.